Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the International Museum of Muslim Culture's Islamic Heritage Month Faith and Art event, A Cross-Faith Trajectory into Islamic Art. I am Lina Ali, Deputy Executive Director and Chief Curator at the IMMC. My guests today are the wonderfully talented artists Sangeetha Kowsik and Paul Barchilon. Paul is of Jewish heritage and practices Islamic geometric pattern design and ceramic painting out of his studio in Boulder, Colorado. Sangeetha is a New York-based Arabic calligraphist and graphic designer of Hindu faith. Join me as we get to know these wonderfully talented artists during Islamic Heritage Month at the International Museum of Muslim Cultures. Sangeetha and Paul, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today. So our program today focuses on a cross-faith trajectory into Islamic art. Sangeetha, as you mentioned, you are a Hindu puja queen, and Paul, you are a Moroccan Jew, but you both practice Islamic art. Let's share with our audience how that came to be, please. We'll do ladies first. Sangeetha, please tell us about your background as an artist and a chaplain, and how you got involved with great institutions such as the Met and the Aga Khan Museum.
Okay, so my name is Sangeetha Kowsik. I was born and raised in Fremont, California. I moved out to New York City to study at Parsons School of Design. So I graduated at Parsons with a degree in communication design, which is graphic design with a heavy emphasis in fashion, because initially I wanted to study fashion. So, so after graduating, I worked throughout the fashion world, fashion, beauty, luxury, packaging, etc. And then I became the head designer for the Metropolitan Museum of Art for their newly formed product design division. So at the Met, so also my religious background, I am Hindu. My father built 3 Hindu temples in the United States. I'm also trained in classical Indian music and dance. So both forms of North Indian and South Indian classical music, so Carnatic and Hindustani vocal, as well as 3 forms of classical Indian dance, Kathak, Bharatanatyam, and Odissi, which are all, so both these music and dance traditions are forms of worship also to praise the divine.
Yeah.
So while at the Met, the Islamic galleries reopened in 2011. So to design product for the shop, what ties all of Islamic art together? Because Moroccan Islamic art, Lebanese Islamic art, Indian Islamic art, they all look very, very different. And the one thing that ties the entire Islamic world together is Arabic calligraphy, because Arabic calligraphy is used to write the Quran, it's used to praise God, it's used to decorate mosques. So that's what attracted me to Arabic calligraphy, was to learn this art form. And plus I'm a typographer and graphic designer by background, to learn this beautiful art form in order to design product for the shop. So I went to NYU, my language professor is Egyptian, and I threw a huge temper tantrum and told him that, look, sir, uncle, please, I really want to learn how to draw the language more than speak it. So he went and he worked for the UN. He found me my ustad, Majid Saif, who's Palestinian, and also worked at the UN with my language professor, and they opened up a Arabic calligraphy degree for me there at NYU. So I have a degree in Arabic calligraphy. So I learned Arabic calligraphy traditionally, all the different styles, including Kufik, Divani, etc., etc. And so that's where my beginning into Arabic calligraphy began, was while working at the Met. So then fast forward a couple of years later, at NYU, they wanted someone to come aboard as a Hindu chaplain. I don't know what the word chaplain means because we don't have that word in Hindu tradition. So it's like basically somebody who could teach students in the Hindu community about Hinduism who was born and raised here. So I said, okay. And so I went to NYU. And so while at NYU, I had heard about Imam Khalid Latif. So Imam Khalid Latif is the Sunni Imam at NYU and the founder of the Islamic Center at NYU. And he's pretty famous in the Muslim world. And and a lot of my friends growing up in California are Pakistani or Afghan Americans, and they all know who Imam Khalid is. So me and Imam Khalid became very close friends. Because I've never met anybody else. He's Pakistani American, I'm Indian American, somebody born and raised here who believes in their faith, and culturally our backgrounds are the same. But Khalid also explained to me how how much animosity there is between Hindus and Muslims, which was mind blowing to me because that's not how I was raised, and that's not what my faith preaches. Maybe what you see in media, what you see in on social media, and plus I'm also South Indian. South India, Islam came to South India through trade routes through Yemen actually, and people kind of intermarried, had dialogues, stayed there. So we were never invaded. There's no temple smashing, mosque burning, none of that happens in South India. So anyway, Khalid and I became very good friends. He's one of my very close friends, and we work really hard to fight these negative stereotypes and dialogues that plague our South Asian communities. So I had a chance to do an Arabic calligraphy exhibition in 2019 about my Arabic, about my calligraphy, but an interfaith initiative, because I decided to launch Ehsan Ishan design. Ehsan means beauty in Arabic, to cleanse your heart of negativity and ego, and Ishan comes from Ishwar, or omnipresent in Sanskrit. So beauty is omnipresent. And this exhibition celebrates and highlights the shared traditions of Islam and Hinduism. For example, like the shirt that I'm wearing says Subhanallah on a finger. Why is it on a finger? Subhanallah means God is perfect, because both Qawwali singers, which are Qawwali is traditional devotional music of Islam, and bhajan singers, traditional devotional music of Hinduism, both stick their fingers up in the air when they sing. And from heaven to, which symbolizes from heaven to your heart, God is there. One God, God is all around. So in addition to this finger, I did the tablas, and I have other artworks that I did too. I basically combined my love for museums, my work in fashion, my Hindu background, my respect and love for Islam, and my work in beauty and luxury to launch this brand, to do this exhibition as well too. So my work is about bringing diverse cultures together and to bring about understanding. So it's part fashion, faith, and education is my background. Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Paul, you have a lot of talent and amazing experience to compete with here.
I think I might start a little further back in time, because I sort of view myself as a product of a couple thousand years of history. So just, my personal family history, on my father's side, he was born in Morocco, and my grandfather in Morocco told my father that the Jews had been in Morocco since the time of King Solomon, and that his family was descended, from that line. So we have this, on my grandfather's side, we have this long lineage. And then on my grandmother's side, and her name was Barchilon, the Spanish tradition is matrilineal. So Barchilon is my grandmother's name. They came in 1492, which is a date that most people in America know because of the supposed, discovery of America. The other thing that happened in 1492 was called the Edict of Expulsion, which is when Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain decreed that all Muslims and all Jews in Spain had to either convert, on penalty of death, or flee. So my ancestors chose to flee on my grandmother's side, and they went to Morocco, where they were, protected and sheltered by the Muslims. And they stayed there for 17 generations. And then my father came across after the Second World War. So my family background on that side had been part of, this beautiful, in Andalusia and Cordoba and Granada. There was really a wonderful culture for over 800 years, where Jews and Muslims and Christians all got along perfectly. So, my personal family history is one of being sheltered by Muslims at a time of tremendous persecution, when Jews weren't even allowed to own property in Europe. And, on my mother's side, she's an Ashkenazi Jew. Her relatives all fled pogroms in Eastern Europe to come here, and those people who stayed in the old world, most of them died in the Holocaust. So, I have these currents of having fled persecution resulted in my two parents, and I was born here in Boulder, Colorado. My dad from Morocco, my mom from Miami. My mom's a painter, my dad was a French professor. And so I grew up here in Boulder, but during the summer, we would always go back to visit my grandparents in Morocco. So as a child, I grew up between these two cultures. And to me, it was like this really, amazing thing. I remember coming back the year before, between kindergarten and first grade, I remember coming back to America and having culture shock for the first time in my life. And my parents had to explain what that was. I was like 6 or whatever, and I was like, oh yeah, that's how I feel. But I remember thinking, like, why is America so ugly? Because I'd been in Morocco and everything was covered in these beautiful patterns. Everything was so gorgeous. And then you come to America and the walls are white and the houses are totally boring. It's like, don't these people know how to decorate? What's going on? So I was visibly confused by that. I've done a lot of teaching. I spent about 15 years teaching in public schools, not as a full-time teacher. I came as a visiting artist, but I did an Islamic art program in the public schools for most of the schools in Boulder at one point, and have taught thousands of 7th graders how to decorate with Islamic patterns. So, I sort of had this, spreading this trajectory. So that's sort of a big historical sense of how I started doing what I was doing. I've always felt a very deep connection with Moroccan art. And when I started doing ceramics in college, I was not, excuse me, I was not that attracted to what I was being taught. And I went back to Morocco over the summer, and, I was in Granada and I was looking at the tiles and I was like, that's what I want to do with clay. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So I came back and started doing that work. And it was not particularly well received at school. It was criticized as being too tight and too anal, and I was supposed to loosen up. And I was like, I felt like if I'd been in Iran, that they would have been like, no, you spend 10 years refining this line before you try to draw this. So I felt like it was the wrong criticism, and I've just been doing ceramics since then, and expanding and learning more, and definitely drawing on my roots, but also trying to integrate some more modern aspects of design.
Sure, sure. So you were surrounded by incredible Islamic art from a very young age, and I can only imagine the role that played in your budding curiosity to study Islamic design and styling. I think back to my trip to Andalusia, Morocco, and I remember being on cloud 9 with the sights, sounds, and smells of the region. It was absolutely gorgeous. What area was your family from in Morocco, or where did they live in Morocco?
They had a house in Casablanca, and then they also had a house in Tangier, and they really had a lovely house in Casablanca, which they were forced to sell for almost nothing during the Second World War. And they basically had to flee Casablanca and move to Tangier, which was a Spanish protectorate. And say what you will about Franco, he never gave up the Jews to Hitler. So there was a degree of protection. My father actually escaped from Morocco in a rowboat in the middle of the night to join the Free French, rowed over to Gibraltar and joined the Free French, and the rest of the family stayed there. So it was just, sort of very dramatic, World War II, history stuff there,
Wow. Wow, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Sangeetha, how do you go from art to chaplaincy? Can you tell us your story about the hipster
The hipster temple?
Hipster temple, yeah, in New York.
Oh yes, I will tell you about. So chaplaincy, I don't get paid for. So it's like I do it because I love my faith and I enjoy teaching about it. So the hipster temple, Broome Street Temple, as I had mentioned before. So it was. So this temple was in Soho District in New York. So it was run by Eddie Stern. I had mentioned to Paul before. He's a Jewish man who went to India, learned Ashtanga yoga, Patanjali sutras. I don't do physical yoga. I know I should because I'm brown, but I don't feel like it. So I rather go to the gym. Anyway, he came to New York City, and he started this temple called Broome Street Temple as a yoga center plus a Hindu temple. Like he installed a small Ganesh Murti as well as a Shiva, and he would do all the prayers. Like you'd have a freelance Hindu priest come from Queens, and I used to help out with all the religious rites. And so most of the people who were coming to the temple were not of South Asian origin, because it's because most people would come for yoga. But Eddie was he's very kind and very honest, saying that yoga came from Hinduism. You must learn the prayers as well. So please come and attend the prayer services as well. So I used to translate all the Sanskrit prayers into English and teach teach all these people. I got 80 Americans who never even heard of what Sanskrit was to sing Mahishasar Mardani Sostram, which is a hymn to goddess Durga, right? Pat on my back for that, 80 people. Yeah, pronunciation, not so good, but whatever, God accepts everything. So anyway, NYU heard about this initiative because they'd never met anybody. Because when you say Hindu in this country, most people expect like an older person. They expect an auntie or an uncle, you know? And then here I come out and everyone's like, huh, what is this, right? But I'm lucky because I grew up inside of a temple. My father built the Shiva Vishnu temple in Livermore, California. I saw this temple come to life. That's why I've always appreciated sculpture, art, beauty, music, dance, because all of these are incorporated in our faith. So anyway, NYU heard about this and they asked me at NYU, would you be interested in being a chaplain? And that's why I don't know, like the word chaplain doesn't exist. So when I met Imam Khalid Latif, who is young, brown, and American like me, I became completely attached to him. And so he explained to me a chaplain is someone who is there for someone the way they need you to be there for them. That's what chaplaincy is. And so it's, so at NYU, I built the NYU Hindu Center. Like we built a small mandap, like a prayer area, and we put it right next to the Islamic Center because I don't like to be separated from Khalid, basically. So it's like, but it's and I take a part in a lot of interfaith dialogues and a female empowerment, women of color empowerment, and also Imam Khalid also introduced me to Sheikha Amina Darwish, the Muslim lady chaplain of Columbia University, who's one of the fiercest voices of Islam I've ever met, female voices I've ever met. And both of us do a lot of panels and a lot of work to empower women and also clear up all these different negative stereotypes and ideas that plague our communities as well too. So she's one of my closest friends. And yeah, she basically goes everywhere with me and we explain what our faith is. Because in the United States, when you say you're religious, immediately, if you're a Hindu and you say you're religious, you're branded as a cow piss drinking right-wing freak. If you say you're religious Muslim, you're immediately a terrorist. If you're religious Christian, you're a Bible thumping, Trump supporting, like Capitol burning person. So Jewish people, they don't know about. Jain, never heard about. Zoroastrian, forget it. Sikh, nope, they don't know what it is. So it's like, for me, as a chaplain, it's also important for me to explain what my faith is and also have dialogues with other faiths and religions within the United States to build a more peaceful and compassionate world. And I think building bridges is through art and design. And Paul, you had mentioned Morocco. I went to Morocco recently. I loved it. I never wanted to come back. I sat in Marrakesh airport and I cried for 2 hours straight and then I cried all the way to Amsterdam and I cried all the way back to New York. It was one of the most beautiful, fascinating places in the world. And I learned Tamazit, Tifnag script. I learned how to write it as well too. Inspiring. Because I believe experiencing other people's religions, cultures is the way to appreciate them and build a more understanding world.
This question is for both of you. I would say, have you or your work always been accepted with open arms, especially from the Muslim community, or have you had setbacks? The idea of appropriation comes up a lot these days, and I think that there's a clear line between appreciation and appropriation. How do you feel about that?
I think I've had, very warm reception from, the Muslim community who have a great deal of respect and really like what I'm doing. And it initially, when I started doing it, it was not particularly well received, like here in America. As I mentioned in college, people are like, why are you doing this? And, not only was it considered derivative, but at the time that I was studying ceramics, for something to be decorative was considered an insult. So, the audacity that I was doing something decorative, my conclusion to that was that this was the wrong place to be doing learning. So I actually, I just had to teach myself. Nobody was teaching what I wanted to learn. And I traveled all over India as well, took over 1,000 photographs in India. And, I came home and sort of analyzed the patterns in these Mughal palaces and stuff. And that was part of how I learned. I wanted to mention, because Sangeetha was talking about, like tolerance and multiculturalism, really beautiful, the story of Akbar the Great, who's around 1500s in India, who's, I think, Humayun's grandson in the Mughal dynasty. And he married a Rajput princess and then encouraged people to have whatever religion they wanted in the 1500s, which was like unheard of, this sort of religious tolerance, really beautiful time. Of course, as soon as he died, they threw it all away. But, there's definitely this thing when these cultures come together, and Akbar's capital, Fatehpur Sikri, which is outside of Agra, this is beautiful, this combination of Islamic, Hindu, and Jain architectural styles, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen on this world. It's just gorgeous. And, so there's so much value to be had in these cultural connections that come from, art communicating. And I feel like art helps people overcome these prejudices. And, when you see these things, I mean, when I started doing my Islamic workshop in the public schools, it was, not that long after 9/11. And, like Sangeetha was saying, oh, well, the only concept of a Muslim is that must be a terrorist. And it's like, no, there's 1.3 billion Muslims in the world, huge range, all these different things, and then when I would show people Islamic art and teach them how to make it, the kids immediately connected with it. And, this prejudice sort of goes out the window within about 30 seconds when they're like, oh, wow, this pattern is Islamic. That's so cool. And, there's this excitement, and that is very much conveyed visually. And so that's why I like teaching, in that context, that it really helps do that. Sorry if I got off topic, but that was.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Wonderful. Sangeetha, could you share that story that you shared with me before about the Hindu ritual that the priests have to go into a mosque to fulfill this ritual? And then you can answer the question as well. How is your work seen in the Muslim community and even in your own community?
Okay. Last time I went to India was 2016. And the person who took me on Hindu pilgrimage was a Muslim. His name was Muhammad, right? Muhammad took me and my parents to all these ancient temples across Tamil Nadu, right? And he was a devout Muslim. He had his kippah on, he had his hat on, he did his namaz, but he knew about all of these Hindu temples. And he was also one of the leaders for the Ayyappan Puja, right? So I asked Muhammad, I'm like, what is the Ayyappan Puja? I've heard about Ayyappa Puja, but he explained to me all of these rituals. So Ayyappan is a deity, predominant. So India's like this. This is the state. This is Tamil Nadu, and this is the state of Kerala in South India. Kerala is a state known for its religious tolerance. It is Hindus, Muslims, Hinduism, and Christianity are all equally represented, plus a whole bunch of Jewish people on top, because there's a giant Jewish population there as well. And people don't know about this, that there's a huge mosque in Cochin. I mean, huge synagogue in Cochin, right? If you get a chance to watch Jeremy Piven, do you know the actor Jeremy Piven, this the Jewish actor from Entourage? He goes to India to find his Jewish heritage, and he ends up at that Cochin synagogue, and he looks at and there's an old lady sitting outside the synagogue going, but you're Indian, how can you be Jewish? And she cusses him out in Malayali, right? She's like, you don't know, this is a faith, and blah, blah, blah. It's pretty funny. Anyway, in Kerala state, there is a deity named Ayyappa. Ayyappan is the son of Lord Vishnu and Lord Shiva. So Ayyappan's fast comes in December time, right? It's a hardcore penance for 41 days. Only men are allowed to take this. No smoking, celibacy, vegetarianism, black clothing only, no cutting of hair, meaning facial or like your hair or nails, sleeping on the floor, and you get into groups of, it's a spirit of brotherhood. Also, you get into groups of like 10 or 12 people. That's why Muhammad is the person who took us on pilgrimage. He's one of these team leaders. Anyway, any man of any faith is allowed to take this penance for Ayyappa, right? So whether you're Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, Christian, Sikhs, you're allowed to take this, provided 41 days you do this hardcore penance and fast. Anyway, the beauty of this beautiful pilgrimage and brotherhood is that when after the fast, they walk to Shabarimala. They walk up to Shabarimala Hills. On top of Shabarimala Hills is Ayyappan's temple. But first stop is at a mosque, Babar Mosque, right? So Babar is believed to be the Muslim companion of Lord Ayyappa. So he was either a Sufi saint, or B, he was an Arab commander. Nobody really knows. But in any case, everyone goes to this mosque to give their prayers first. And the Muslims are the ones who make prasadam, which is a sacred offering and food for all the pilgrims who visit. It is beautiful to see this mosque. I'll share the video with you. This mosque, it says Bismillah, everything has mosque architecture with the dome, but a giant temple elephant with Ayyappan strapped on its back is walking through this temple, right? And it's like everyone, and there's thousands of people going into this mosque to offer prayers. They do the circulation around the inner sanctum. They also walk backwards out of the mosque, touching the mosque stairs to their heart and their eyes, because they don't want to show their back to Allah, because God is divine, right? So after the mosque, then they all walk up the hill to the Ayyappan temple, saying Swami Sharanam Ayyappa, which means glory to Lord Ayyappa. Then they come back down and they stop at Saint Sebastian's church, because they believe the Jesuit priest there in the 15th century was also a companion of Ayyappa, and he built the temple tank there. So everyone takes a ritualistic dip in that tank, and they take off their rosary bead, the mala. It's called a mala, a black necklace. They take it off to say that they've completed their pilgrimage, they've completed the fast, and renouncing themselves to God. So it is phenomenal and beautiful seeing this celebration. And I just find it odd that the media doesn't talk about this brotherhood. They don't talk about this beautiful fast when it's a humongous pilgrimage. Like superstars, Amitabh Bachchan, I don't know if you're familiar with Bollywood, but Amitabh Bachchan and Salman Khan have all done this penance and done this fast also. Jay Sudas, who's a Christian, a very famous Christian singer, he also does this every year. So it's really, really beautiful. Like South Indian culture, the Kerala, people can learn a lot from the Malayali people. And I know like the political parties or whatever in the north try to come and put a stop to all this interfaith stuff, but it's been going on for thousands of years. You can't bully the South. They will fight back and keep doing what they're doing. So it's pretty beautiful what this Ayyappan passes. And I'm lucky and honored that Mohammed shared with me every single step that they take and that they do. So it was really interesting. And I feel very blessed that I was able to meet Mohammed and go on this pilgrimage with my parents. So
yeah.
very interesting.
No, that is interfaith coexistence at its very best. I think that's a wonderful story, because unfortunately, as you said, in the media, all you hear about is the conflict between Hindus and Muslims in India, unfortunately.
I got invited by the Islamic Arts Society to showcase in Houston. I also went to two Islamic, I didn't know that that Islamic conferences existed in the United States, but apparently they do. And Imam Khalid spoke at two of them. So I went to ISNA in Houston, and then Reviving the Islamic Spirit in Toronto as well. And I had, and people really enjoy learning about South Asian traditions as well too, through the art of Arabic calligraphy, because I also had a chance to experience the African-American community. I was in African-American Muslim community who invited me to Philadelphia last year for Eid. And so they don't know what tabla or qawwali singing is. And they were really interested to learn about these things as well. The only pushback that what I've received is that some schools of Islam say that music is haram. And I'm like, tell that to Zakir Hussain, the greatest tabla player in the world, who's wearing my tabla sweatshirt on Instagram Live for 3 weeks straight, you know? Or the Ali Akbar Khan School of Music. I'm very close friends with both their sons. Ali Akbar Khan, he's passed away, but he was the one who did the groundbreaking ceremony at the Hindu temple that my father built in California. Wow. So there's a Muslim name on this big Orthodox Shiva Vishnu temple in California. So it's music is divine. Music is a gift from God, and it's a fine art that brings Hindus and Muslims together. So, and I've pushed back. A lot of Hindus have said, why don't you write Sanskrit? Why don't you write like Tamil? Okay, first of all, I speak Tamil fluently. Tamil is very difficult for me to write. I'll tell you that. I just don't connect with it. And then Sanskrit, Hindi all have this bar on top that connects the letters that annoy me. So it's like, it's very difficult for me to do artwork with that. Arabic is free flowing. It's more for me to explore as an artist. And also Kowsik script is something that you can make as your own. Sure, it was inspired by architecture from mosques, but it's also free flowing in the sense you can style it to make it your very own. So that's the only, so those are the two pushbacks I've received, but I have a lot of Muslim musician friends who also get flack from the Muslim community for playing music, but provided it's not haram. It's a, if you're playing divine music, if you're playing tabla, sitar, singing qawwali music, these are all divine art forms, praising the divine. So it's like, there's nothing wrong about that. So, so yeah, that's, I'm honored and very happy that my work has been well received, and I look forward to exploring more. I had mentioned that when I went to Morocco and I learned about the Amazigh people, and then the Tifinagh script also, Tamazight language, because it's very similar. It's an ancient language like Tamil is. Everyone knows Hindi in the United States if you're Indian, but they don't know what Tamil is. So it's like same thing when you go to Morocco, people know Arabic is, but they don't know what Tamazight is really. So it's fascinating for me to also learn about different cultures and be inspired by them and create artwork. So it's like, haters are always going to hate. I think if you do something, if you're creating art from your own heart, and what is your intention behind it? So my intention also, it's like my artwork is also a prayer to the divine. It's a prayer to God as well when I'm creating, because Arabic calligraphy, traditionally when you learn it, you have to cut your brushes, mix your paints and all of this thing. And the first word I ever learned how to write was Bismillah.
Paul, have you ever dabbled in Arabic calligraphy? And tell us about your geometric pattern work and your ceramics.
Yeah, so not being able to read Arabic, I do feel like that's been an obstacle in that. I can't read Hebrew either, but I have this immense love for Arabic calligraphy. I just think it's one of the most beautiful forms. And of course, as Sangeetha mentioned, you see it all over in mosques, and it is in fact the unifying element in all Islamic cultures. I mean, I think in the US especially, people tend to think of Islamic culture as like a monolithic thing, like there is just one Islamic culture. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. There's so many different countries that are Muslim, and they're all different from each other, and they all have different standards and different things and different orientations. So I love that calligraphy as an art form. I think it's really beautiful. And for me, my focus has been on pure geometric abstraction, which is of course another very classical focus. And I feel like my work is very solidly in that tradition. It fits, quite well in about 1300 years of Islamic art. And Morocco definitely has its own style, and that is the style that I work in. It's quite different from, say, like the Ottoman style that you see in Turkey that's very floral. It's a different kind of thing. You get combinations of the floral elements and things like that, but the underlying geometry is one of the main things that I've been working on a lot. And I started doing it on platters and vases, and then moved into doing tiles. All of my work is done completely by hand, and it's very time consuming. So I tried to find ways to make parts of the process faster, because you go to a mosque or a palace in Morocco and they do zalij, which is this beautiful art form. It's mosaic art form, but every little piece in the star pattern is its own individual cut tile. And I mean, it's thousands of hours to produce even a single panel, and despite that, all over Morocco, you see this art form everywhere. Even very poor people will try to have at least, one room that has some zalij in their house. There's this great connection with how wonderful this art form is. So that's even more time consuming than what I'm doing. And I try to find ways that I can make things that are a little faster, but still allow me to express the beauty of what's going on with the artwork. And it's been quite well received, particularly in the last 10 years or so, as I've been able to sell online and reach a wider audience. And I actually ship stuff all over the world, but the international shipping is a lot. So most of my commissions are here in the US for my larger tile commissions. But it's great that I've finally been able to find an audience to connect with it.
That's wonderful. So do you find your work goes into private collections, or do you have any pieces in public establishments, museums, galleries?
I view myself more as a craftsman working in a traditional medium. And I don't make a big distinction between craft and art like some people do. So a lot of my work is going in people's houses, kitchens, that sort of thing, patios, fountains, of course, right? All these contexts that we see that Islamic art will be used in the secular space goes in a lot of. I would love to decorate a mosque at some point. I've not had the opportunity to do that yet, but I'm sure it'll come along at some point.
Mhm. And you wanted to share a story about the Kennecott Bible. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, yeah. Let me share my screen, and then you can do. So this is a piece from what's called the Kennecott Bible. It's actually a Torah that was illuminated in La Corona, Spain in 1476. So this is sort of a product of this era when Jews would have been, part of the Islamic culture in the area, and working with that and working in the same kinds of styles as you see. This is one of the carpet pages, which is the front or back, and looks just like a Quran. So really beautiful images here. This is the back page. And you can see these are very classical Islamic patterns. We see these all over the place, and the gold as well is something that you're going to see in Islamic illumination and stuff. I love this piece, and I actually made a platter that was inspired off this one on the right. So this is micrography, which is tiny Hebrew writing, and it's actually forming the pattern. So this has, sort of affinities, with calligraphy being such a key component in Islamic art. And you can see close up in here, this is all just tiny little writing in Hebrew, forming interlace even, which I just think is really, really cool. So this is a beautiful piece, so I feel like this is sort of the artistic and cultural heritage that I come from directly, and it's sort of, I wasn't even aware that I had this sort of connection until I started exploring my heritage more, and then realizing that there was this whole backstory. I just saw this beautiful stuff and I'm like, wow, that's so great, but when I started learning more about it, it was interesting. Again, this is a specimen Moroccan pattern. You see this all over the place, a very classical pattern in the way the knot is done. And, this really looks like a Quran, except for it's Hebrew.
Yeah, that's amazing. I
Yeah,
love this connection. That's wonderful.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
a typical Torah would not necessarily usually look like this?
So, this is an illuminated manuscript. Torahs, can come in many different forms, but yeah, this is definitely one that is in the Islamic style. Yeah,
Okay.
you wouldn't
Okay.
see this kind of decoration or embellishment. And Torahs, of course, Torah means scrolls, so they're usually on a big scroll instead of in a book. This one has been bound. And then there's all these fanciful little creatures as well, which here's the pink polka dot dragon,
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, sort of marvelous. And so I love, again, these are very classical patterns. And we sort of have this association now with the six-sided star being a Jewish symbol, but that's actually a very modern association. It dates to Theodor Herzl in the 1820s and the Zionist movement, and then it's on the flag for the nation of Israel, but it's actually been used in Islamic art throughout history and in all of these other cultures as well. So this happens to be a six-sided star, but you also find eight-sided stars throughout this document, etc. So I can share some of my art if you want me to. Is that
Nice.
okay?
Yes, please.
This uses an Iranian design system, Central Asian really, called Gira, which is a set of tiles that can interact in different ways. You can see some of the shapes here. So this, for example, is one of the Gira shapes, and these shapes all fit together in different ways. So you can plug them together. This is sort of how I design on the computer. I usually design by hand, but for these I needed to make tile stencils. So I did this on the computer so that I can do that in vinyl. So this pattern system has all of these different ways that these elements can be combined together. And you see this in Isfahan, you see this in Samarkand, all over this region, very amazing design system, starting around 1200 and sort of spreading, and it's all five-sided design. So this is made with the same Gira tiles. I don't know, can you see my mouse here?
Mhm.
Does
Yeah.
it show up? So this shape right here, like an almond right there, that's one of the Gira shapes. And then you've got a little rhombus here. That's another one of the Gira shapes. So this composition has just those two pieces. And then within the Gira tiling, I've actually created my own patterns. So there's multiple levels of patterning going on. I'm using a design system that's at least 800 years old. And then I'm doing my own patterning inside of that. So it's a composite level. Here we have, this is what's called the bow tie. This shape kind of looks like a bow tie. So that's one tile. And we've got the pentagon here. And then we've got a decagon in the center. So working with the Gira tiling allowed me to sort of start to make these a little faster. I make these with stencils that I paint the tile. It's still an all-day process, but I can, make many of them at once kind of thing. This is an example using the Gira tiling as well, but with this I made little tiny stamps that I've impressed into the clay to create the patterns, and then I've painted the glaze areas differently so that you get these different colors coming on. And I tried all sorts of things for the stamps. It ended up being refrigerator magnets that worked the best, and I cut them up and glued them together with tweezers and a paintbrush and made these little tiny stamps on the clay. So this is another piece that demonstrates how you can use these different Gira shapes, right? So we see that rhombus here, there's a pentagon here. Here's that almond shape we were looking at earlier. If you put 5 of the rhombuses together, you form a nice 5-sided star, and it's surrounded by 10-sided stars. So it's a very fertile design system. This is a Seder plate. So Seder plates are for celebrating Passover, a Jewish holiday. And this is, we have different traditional foods that we put on these special little plates. And so I made this Seder plate that is, definitely in the Islamic tradition, featuring the gold outline and these intricate patterns. And so that's kind of a fun combination of those different elements right there in my artwork. Here's one of my tiles. This central star is in 12, and then these smaller stars here are in 9. When you put them together, you see that this forms a 9-sided star here surrounded by 12-sided stars.
So I'm assuming these are glazed and then fired in a kiln, is that correct?
Correct, yeah. Yeah, I fired about 2,300 degrees. So here's a field of that. Here's one of my earlier pieces, and this is based on a Moroccan heart knot motif, which you also find in Buddhism and stuff, this little double knot here. So I've got a heart here and a heart here, and then the plate is divided into 9, which is quite unusual. So 3 times 9 is 27, so I call this plate 27 lovers.
Mm.
And here's one that's in 14 and 12, outlined in gold. And these are big platters. They're about 16 inches across. It's like 25 pounds of clay when I'm working on the wheel. After it's fired and, trimmed and stuff, it's only, like 5 or 6 pounds, but it's a lot when I'm working with it.
So are you creating your own platters out of clay first and then
Yeah.
painting them?
Yeah,
Wow.
I do everything. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful.
So, and here's another platter that's using the Gira tiling. Here's my most recent design, actually. I'm trying to learn more of the arabesque or biomorphic style, which is very alien to all the stuff that I've learned before. And so I've been working on learning that, studying a lot of stuff from Iran and also a lot of stuff from Morocco. And this is my first successful original design in this pattern family. So I've been pleased with that.
I love that. That's beautiful.
That's
Thank
beautiful.
you. I think that's my last slide. Oh, here's one example of it in different colors. And that's it. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
That's wonderful. I want to thank you both very much for your time and for sharing your wonderful, unique experiences with me. I love the fact, Paul, that you're a Jewish man that loves practicing Islamic art, and Sangeetha, same with you, as a Hindu woman, beautifully practicing Arabic calligraphy. I think it's absolutely amazing. Your works are very beautiful, and I certainly appreciate both of your efforts, and I'm sure many people out there do too. So please continue doing what you're doing. It is much appreciated. I want to remind our audience as well that you can sign up to join a webinar on Islamic geometric patterns by our guest today, Paul Barchilon, taking place on Sunday, April 4th at 1:30 p.m. as part of our Faith and Art series during Islamic Heritage Month at the International Museum of Muslim Cultures. You can also take a Turkish Ebru class that you can join as part of our collaboration and partnership with the Islamic Arts Society in Houston, Texas. You can follow us on Facebook at /Muslim Museum and on Instagram at IMMC_MS to learn more about these programs. Paul and Sangeetha, it has been a pleasure. Thank you again for joining me at the International Museum of Muslim Cultures.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, it was really,
Thank
really
you.
fun. Wonderful cross-cultural collaboration.